The day before we flew to the venue, my fiancée said she left her passport at her sister's. I offered to drive. She insisted she'd grab it. Her sister's apartment belonged to her coworker, the one she always said was gay. He wasn't, and he answered the door in her robe. That's when I realized my fiancé had been lying since day one. I was, 24 hours before our dream vacation to Costa Rica, checking off items on my mental list like some obsessive wedding planner. Our flights were booked, hotel reserved, and Zoe had been talking about this trip for months. She'd saved up her vacation days, bought new bikinis, the whole 9 yards. Everything was perfect until she dropped the bomb over dinner. She was picking at her pasta when she suddenly looked up with those big brown eyes and said her passport was at her sister's place. Now, Zoe's sister Megan lived clear across town, and with traffic, it would be at least a 2-hour round trip. I offered to drive since I knew she'd been stressed about work, but she waved me off, insisting she'd handle it herself. The thing is, Zoe had always been weird about me meeting Megan. In 3 years together, I'd seen her sister exactly twice, both times briefly at family gatherings where Megan seemed to vanish whenever I tried to start a conversation. Zoe always had excuses for why I couldn't come along to family dinners or why Megan was always too busy to hang out with us. But I trusted her completely, so I never pushed. That evening, while she was supposedly at Megan's, I decided to surprise her by packing her suitcase. Zoe was notorious for last-minute packing disasters, and I wanted to make her life easier. I pulled out her favorite sundresses, grabbed her toiletries, and was folding her underwear when I found something that made my blood freeze. Hidden under a stack of bras was a second phone. Not just any phone, but an expensive smartphone that was clearly being used regularly. The screen was cracked like she'd dropped it recently, and when I picked it up, it was still warm. My hands started shaking as I stared at this device I'd never seen before in 3 years of living together. I knew I shouldn't look, but something deep in my gut was screaming that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. The phone wasn't locked, and when the screen lit up, I saw dozens of text messages from someone named Jay. The most recent one, sent just 10 minutes ago, made me want to throw up. The message read, "Can't wait for you to get here, baby. I've got wine chilling and your favorite playlist ready." Below that were photos that definitely weren't meant for me to see. Photos of Zoe in lingerie I'd never seen before, in what looked like someone else's bedroom. I scrolled up through weeks of messages, each one more devastating than the last. Inside jokes about places they'd been together, plans for weekend getaways I knew nothing about, and worst of all, conversations about me. About how she was getting tired of keeping up the charade but wasn't ready to end things because the wedding planning had already started and she didn't want to deal with the fallout. My entire world tilted sideways as I realized that Jay wasn't just some random guy. The messages referenced work meetings, office gossip, and something about how funny it was that I thought he was gay. Jay was obviously her coworker, the one she'd mentioned dozens of times as her gay work husband, who she sometimes grabbed lunch with. The passport story was complete bullshit. She wasn't at her sister's house. She was at Jay's apartment, probably doing exactly what those photos suggested. And suddenly, every late work meeting, every girl's night that seemed to happen more and more frequently, every time she'd been distant or distracted, all made horrible sense. I sat on our bed, holding this secret phone, feeling like someone had ripped my chest open. The woman I'd planned to marry, the person I trusted with my entire future, had been living a double life right under my nose. But the worst part wasn't just the cheating. It was how elaborate the deception had been. This wasn't some drunken mistake or moment of weakness. This was a calculated, ongoing betrayal that had been happening for months, maybe longer. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting her when she got home with whatever lie she'd prepared about getting the passport, I was going to find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. I was going to Jay's apartment myself. The drive to Jay's place felt like swimming through molasses while my brain ran at light speed. I'd found his address by cross-referencing the location tags in some of the photos with his social media profiles, which were surprisingly easy to find once I knew his real name wasn't Jay, but Jaden Pierce, and he definitely wasn't gay. His Instagram was full of pictures with various women, including several recent ones with Zoe that she'd obviously helped him hide from mutual connections. As I drove through traffic, my phone kept buzzing with texts from Zoe. "Traffic is terrible. Might be another hour." Then 20 minutes later, "Megan's being dramatic about some family stuff. You know how she gets." Each lie felt like a physical blow, but I kept driving. The apartment complex was nicer than I'd expected, one of those modern buildings with a doorman and everything. I parked across the street and sat in my car, staring up at the building, trying to figure out what exactly I was planning to do. Confront them? Take photos? Beat the shit out of this guy? My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. That's when I saw her car pulling into the underground garage. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She was really here. It wasn't some elaborate misunderstanding or innocent explanation. The woman I'd been planning to marry was parking her car at another man's apartment building while telling me she was at her sister's house. I waited exactly 15 minutes, then walked into the lobby like I belonged there. The doorman was distracted by a delivery, so I slipped past and took the elevator to the 7th floor. Apartment 712, according to the address I'd found. Standing outside that door, I could hear music playing inside. Something jazzy and romantic, exactly the kind of thing Zoe always put on when she wanted to set a mood. My stomach was churning as I raised my hand to knock, but then I heard something that stopped me cold. Laughter. Zoe's laugh, but not the polite laugh she used in public or even the comfortable laugh she used with me. This was different, more genuine, like she was completely relaxed and happy in a way I realized I hadn't seen in months. Through the thin door, I could hear her voice, muffled but unmistakably hers, saying something about how she'd managed to get away without suspicion. The betrayal was one thing, but hearing how happy she sounded while lying to me was something else entirely. I stood there for probably 5 full minutes, listening to the two of them talk and laugh like they were the only people in the world who mattered, while I waited at home like an idiot, worried about packing her suitcase correctly. Finally, I knocked. The music stopped immediately, and I heard frantic whispering. Footsteps approached the door, and then nothing for almost a minute. I knocked again, harder this time. When the door opened, it wasn't Zoe who answered. It was a guy about my age, athletic build, wearing nothing but a bathrobe. His hair was messy, and he had that post-sex glow that was impossible to mistake. For a second, we just stared at each other, both of us clearly trying to process what was happening. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his voice cracked slightly because he obviously knew exactly who I was. "Is Zoe here?" I managed to get out, even though my throat felt like sandpaper. His face went completely white. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." That's when I heard her voice from somewhere inside the apartment, calling out to ask who was at the door. The sound of her voice, so casual and unworried, was what finally broke something inside me. "No misunderstanding," I said, pushing past him into the apartment. The apartment was exactly what I'd expected from someone trying to impress a woman who was already taken. Expensive furniture, mood lighting, candles everywhere, and Zoe's clothes scattered on the living room floor like breadcrumbs leading to the bedroom. The smell of wine and her perfume hung in the air like evidence of how long this had been going on. Zoe appeared from what I assumed was the bathroom, wearing one of those silk robes she'd bought for our anniversary but claimed she'd lost. When she saw me standing in the living room, her face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Shock, panic, anger, and then something that looked almost like relief. "This isn't what it looks like," she started, but even she seemed to realize how ridiculous that sounded given the circumstances. "Really?" I held up her secret phone, which I'd been carrying like a weapon. "Because it looks like you've been fucking your coworker for months while planning our wedding and lying about everything from family dinners to work schedules." Jaden tried to disappear into the kitchen, but I wasn't having it. "Don't you dare leave this room. You're part of this conversation now." What followed was the most brutal 20 minutes of my life. Not because of the yelling or accusations, but because of how quickly everything I thought I knew about my relationship dissolved into nothing. Zoe didn't deny the affair, didn't try to minimize it, didn't even seem particularly sorry about it. Instead, she started talking about how she'd felt trapped, how our relationship had become routine and boring, how she'd never felt the kind of passion with me that she felt with Jaden. She talked about our upcoming wedding like it was some obligation she'd been dreading rather than something she'd spent months planning with apparent enthusiasm. The worst part was learning how long it had been going on. Not months, but over a year. Their affair had started before we'd even gotten engaged, which meant she'd said yes to my proposal while already cheating. She'd chosen her wedding dress, sent out save the dates, and planned our honeymoon, all while maintaining a relationship with another man. But then Jaden said something that made everything even worse. He mentioned how guilty he'd felt about the whole situation, especially after he'd met me at the office Christmas party. I stared at him, confused, because I'd never been to Zoe's office Christmas party. She'd told me it was employees only, that bringing partners would be awkward. "What Christmas party?" I asked. That's when I learned about the parallel life Zoe had been living. Not just the affair, but an entire alternate version of our relationship that she'd been presenting to her coworkers. In that version, we were having problems, thinking about couples therapy, possibly heading toward a breakup. She'd been laying the groundwork for months to make our eventual separation seem natural and mutual rather than the devastating betrayal it actually was. Her coworkers knew about Jaden. They'd been covering for her, creating alibis, helping her maintain the deception. The girls' nights had often been double dates with other couples from work. The late meetings were actually dinners and events where she'd been introducing Jaden as her boyfriend, while I sat at home waiting for her to come back. How many people knew? I asked, and the silence that followed told me everything. Not just a few close friends keeping a secret, but practically her entire workplace had been watching this drama unfold while I remained completely oblivious. That's when Zoe dropped the bomb that shattered what was left of my world. She told me she'd been planning to end our engagement after the Costa Rica trip. She was going to use the romantic setting to have an honest conversation about our relationship, make it seem like a mutual decision that we weren't right for each other, and then transition into being single without anyone knowing about the affair. The trip I'd been looking forward to for months, that I'd saved money for and planned special surprises for, was supposed to be the backdrop for her breaking up with me. She'd let me pay for everything, book the flights and hotel, plan activities, all while knowing she was going to destroy our relationship before we even got home. But that wasn't the end of it. As I stood there processing the magnitude of her deception, Zoe's phone started ringing. Not the secret phone I'd found, but her regular phone. When she answered, I could hear crying on the other end. It was her sister Megan, hysterical about something, but Zoe kept trying to cut her off and get her to call back later. That's when I realized that Megan probably had no idea about any of this either. The sister who supposedly lived across town and was always too busy to meet me might have been just as much a victim of Zoe's lies as I was. I grabbed the phone from her hand and put it on speaker. Megan, this is going to sound crazy, but I need to ask you something. Do you have Zoe's passport at your house? The silence on the other end was deafening before Megan started talking rapid fire about how she'd been trying to reach Zoe all day because their mother had been in a car accident and was in the hospital. She'd been calling for hours, getting voicemail, and had no idea why Zoe wasn't answering. What passport? Megan asked. And why would it be at my house? I live in Seattle. That's when the final piece of Zoe's elaborate deception fell into place. Not only had she been lying about the affair, but she'd been lying about her family situation for years. Her sister didn't live across town. She lived across the country. The reason I'd never really met Megan wasn't because of scheduling conflicts or family drama, but because maintaining that lie would have been impossible if we'd spent any real time together. I looked at Zoe, who had gone completely pale. Your mother is in the hospital, I said, and watched her face crumble as she realized that her lies had just caused her to miss hours of a real family emergency while she was playing house with her boyfriend. But the revelation about her family was nothing compared to what Jaden said next. He'd been standing quietly through most of this, probably hoping he could just disappear, but now he looked panicked. Zoe, I need to tell you something. I've been seeing other people too. The look on her face was almost worth everything I'd been through. The woman who had been systematically lying to me for over a year, who had built an entire false reality to cover her tracks, suddenly looked like someone had slapped her. What do you mean, other people? It turned out that while Zoe thought she was the only woman in Jaden's life, he'd been maintaining relationships with multiple coworkers, including her supposed best friend from the office. The elaborate romantic setup in his apartment wasn't special for her. It was his standard routine for cycling through different women. As Zoe processed this betrayal on top of everything else, her phone kept ringing with calls from family members about her mother's accident. The weight of all her lies was finally catching up with her, and she was starting to realize that her carefully constructed alternate reality was collapsing in real time. I watched her scramble to call the hospital, try to book a flight to Seattle, and deal with the fact that she'd been unreachable during a family crisis because she'd been too busy cheating on me. The irony wasn't lost on me that her lies had not only destroyed our relationship, but had also prevented her from being there when her family actually needed her. The confrontation ended with Zoe crying on Jaden's couch while he packed her things and made it clear that whatever they'd had was over. She'd lost both relationships in the span of an hour, and her mother was in the hospital 3,000 miles away. I left that apartment feeling strangely calm. The initial devastation had given way to something like relief. For months, I'd felt like something was off in our relationship without being able to put my finger on it. I'd blamed myself for not being attentive enough, romantic enough, interesting enough. Now I knew the problem was never me. The aftermath was messier than the confrontation itself. Zoe had to tell her family why she hadn't been reachable during the emergency, which meant explaining the affair and the elaborate lies she'd been maintaining. Her mother recovered from the accident, but their relationship took a serious hit when the truth came out. At work, the fact that multiple people had been covering for her affair created a toxic environment that eventually led to both her and Jaden finding new jobs. Turns out that when office affairs go public, it makes everyone uncomfortable, especially when it involves that level of deception. I had to cancel our Costa Rica trip, but the travel insurance didn't cover my fiancé is a cheating liar, so I ate most of the cost. The wedding deposits were a bigger financial hit, but I considered it a relatively cheap price to pay for discovering who she really was before legally binding myself to her. The hardest part was realizing how many mutual friends had suspected something was going on, but hadn't said anything. Some claimed they didn't want to get involved. Others said they weren't sure and didn't want to cause problems based on speculation. I learned to appreciate the few people who admitted they'd had concerns, but hadn't known how to bring them up. Zoe tried to reach out several times in the weeks that followed, wanting to explain herself or asking if we could work things out. She seemed genuinely shocked that I wasn't interested in hearing her reasons or trying to rebuild trust. I think she'd gotten so comfortable with manipulation and deception that she couldn't understand why her usual tactics weren't working. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she and Jaden had tried to get back together briefly, but it didn't work out. Apparently, once you know someone is capable of maintaining elaborate lies for over a year, it's hard to trust anything they say. Who would have thought? As for me, I'm doing better than I expected. The relationship I thought I'd lost had actually ended a long time before I found out about it. The person I'd been mourning didn't really exist. She was just a character Zoe had been playing while living her real life with someone else. The experience taught me to trust my instincts when something feels off, even if I can't explain why. It also showed me the difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who's comfortable living a lie for months or years. One might be forgivable. The other is a fundamental character issue that no amount of couples therapy was going to fix. These days, when friends tell me about relationship problems they're having, I listen for the signs I missed. The stories that don't quite add up, the explanations that seem unnecessarily complicated, the feeling that you're not getting the whole truth about something important. Sometimes the red flags are obvious in hindsight, but they're easy to rationalize away when you love someone. I never did make it to Costa Rica, but I'm planning a trip there next year with friends who won't spend the entire vacation planning to dump me. It'll be a different kind of adventure, but probably a better one. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.